Good afternoon, everyone. We thank you all for joining. At this time, we are starting the session. You should be able to see our panelists today and President Dr. Stephen Pruitt with SREB. Just give a moment to everyone to get settled and welcome in. If you have any questions, either for our panelists today or technical difficulties, please feel free to use the chat box and we will address them as we go on. Okay.
I see the Chancellor now.
Welcome. Okay, at this time, I will turn it over to Dr. Pruitt to get us started.
Thank you, Jasmine. Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you so much for being a part of our Emerging Stronger series. We are excited to bring this to you. We would ask that as we go through this, we want you to be engaged and feel free to ask questions through the chat box. As Jasmine said, we'll be able to go through there and answer your questions. Also, we just ask that as we go through this is a series. So we hope that you'll return, but not only that you'll return, but you'll return with somebody, bring somebody along. Share this with your colleagues within your network so that we can get this information out as much as possible. So just as a little bit of a background, why did the Southern Regional Education Board choose to do this? Now, I hope that all of you know who SREB is, but just in case you don't, we are an interstate compact across our 16 states. And what that means is, the short way to say it is when two states build a bridge over a body of water, they enter an interstate compact and it goes into state law, and basically they're going to provide access and maintenance to the bridge. We were created in 1948 to support our 16 states, and we're sort of that metaphorical education bridge across our 16 states. So as we were working on how to best support our post-secondary friends, and I'm going to introduce him in just a second, but Chancellor Johnson and I co-chaired a committee or a task force on reopening post-secondary. As part of that, we heard loud and clear, and we know just from the data, how our post-secondary institutions have been really disproportionately hammered by the pandemic and by the economics. And so we had John and Huron come and present at that, and we got such a great response. We thought we needed to come back and do an actual series on Emerging Stronger. Now is the time that we have to rethink how we're doing some things. Now is the time we have to reconsider how to best support our students, but also how to ensure our students are going to get through to graduation or to certification. We know that our workforce has changed drastically just in the time that the pandemic has been on. In fact, we've seen that industry is now more dependent on automation than ever before. In fact, the dependence on automation accelerated 5 years in just 8 weeks over that shutdown period. So we've got to think about how to look at post-secondary differently. We have to think about how we're going to push the envelope. We have to, above all, make sure that we're going to support our students. Because here's what I know. I know that our post-secondary institutions are the engine that will drive the economy back and keep our economy as the world's best. So if we don't take care of our post-secondary now, I fear what will happen to our economy and to the workforce in the future. So we wanted to bring you this. We are happy and excited to be partnering with Huron and with John. I want to publicly thank Chris Byrne and Glen McLaurin for the work that you guys put in on this. Also, Beth Day on our staff who really just pulled all this together. And of course, Jasmine, who is our mistress of ceremonies. Now, without further ado, I want to introduce you to my good friend, the Vice Chair of the Southern Regional Education Board and Chancellor of the Oklahoma State Regents. A man to probably many of you do not need any time of introduction, but actually one of the most brilliant people I've ever been around, and a very dear friend. Chancellor Johnson.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Pruitt, and good afternoon to everyone that's joining us for our call. This is as Dr. Pruitt mentioned, this is the first webinar in the Emerging Stronger webinar series that's sponsored by SREB in partnership with Huron Consulting Group. And I want to begin by thanking Dr. Stephen Pruitt, the president of SREB, our staff at SREB, and our executive committee for having the foresight to sponsor a webinar series of this type. I think we've been from the beginning sensitive. The formation of the task force on COVID-19 recovery was another example of that. And again, bringing best practices from, if you will, the experts is a great way to provide our campuses, our systems, and our higher ed system in the 16 state SREB region with cutting edge information. So in addition to this webinar series, I might mention that SREB developed a virtual playbook that provided best practice guidance and consideration for our colleges and universities as they continue to navigate recovery based on the impacts of COVID-19. Throughout the work, our task force was able to bring in, expert speakers to discuss institutional policies and procedures, campus reopening plans. We spent quite a bit of time on protocols to reopen safely for fall 2020, to do that in a way that certainly provided protection for faculty, staff, students, but also adhered to all of the COVID-19 protocols. Navigating the very sensitive legal terrain that we've all encountered with COVID-19 as we continue to maneuver and address the impacts of COVID-19. Mitigating the spread of COVID on our campuses, and certainly doing that in a way that takes our campus community and their needs, makes them first and foremost. We also discussed the very important provision of student support services, strategic planning and effort to address COVID both in the short term and the long term, as we look at what clearly we've already seen are changing business models, and we're going to talk about that today as we look to the bottom line, which is continued viability of our college and universities that have absolutely been disrupted in the wake of COVID-19. One of the expert teams that volunteered their time and expertise to assist our SREB task force on COVID-19 recovery was Huron Consulting. And I've had the opportunity to work with Huron and their team on several projects in my role as Chancellor of the State System of Higher Education in Oklahoma. Prior to the pandemic, well before March of 2020, Huron assisted the state regents and me in conducting fiscal viability reviews for all 25 of our state system colleges and universities and our 2 medical schools. And they identified several significant opportunities on every campus for additional collaboration and partnering to be more strategic, and certainly to position our campuses where they can be more effective, more efficient, and addressing the mission that they have for their students, for our higher ed system, and certainly the role that we play in our state. Huron has a dedicated higher ed practice and has served hundreds of college and university clients in recent years. Last year, they were focused on supporting institutions as these institutions respond to the financial, the operational, and the strategic challenges in the wake of the COVID pandemic. Given their knowledge, their expertise, and track record, we're very excited to partner with Huron on this webinar series, which will address some of the short-term challenges still facing our colleges and universities in the wake of COVID-19, as well as transformative approaches that institutions have recently taken to remain competitive and to better serve their students, their faculty, their staff, their alumni, and our broader communities. Today's session is intended to serve as an introductory kickoff to this webinar series. And as we look at this ways we can emerge from the pandemic in an even stronger way than we were pre-pandemic, we're going to be looking at recent higher ed market trends, new challenges posed by COVID-19, and potential long-term implications. We're going to look at relevant case studies highlighting the transformative change that's being implemented by institutions in this way in recent years. Huron will cover these topics in approximately 40 minutes, which will leave 20 minutes for questions and answers and group discussion. I might also mention, looking ahead, if you have the information that we've sent, the remaining 4 webinars will be more specialized. They'll cover topics that we believe are critically important to our SREB institutions. These topics for the future webinars will include aligning faculty effort to institutional mission, administrative efficiencies, enhancing the mission, enrollment management and strategy, and ensuring that our community college emerged from the pandemic stronger. With that said, I'll turn it over to John Curry, Principal Officer at Huron, to kick us off today. Again, I want to thank all of you for joining us and hope that you can participate in the future upcoming webinars as well. So please help me welcome John Curry and the Huron team. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Chancellor Johnson. It's a pleasure to be here. I will take us through just a couple of early slides in this presentation. At this moment, I would like to introduce you to my colleague during this presentation, Jennifer Ramey. She is going to be focusing especially on the case studies because she has particularly good knowledge of those around the country and has been involved in some of them herself. We also have a couple of other members of our team available if we need to, who have been involved in some of this work, but we'll try to move along with this just as quickly as we can. So let's go to the Chancellor went through this portion of the agenda with us, and so we'll just move right on. We do have a poll question, which I think you can answer as we are talking. Am I correct in that?
Yes, you are.
So the poll question really is for us to get a sense of who's with us on the call, what your various roles are at your colleges and universities, so we can sort of know the landscape in real time as we move toward the end. Can we move on with the presentation as the poll number 1 is available for people to look at if they need to? Yeah, let's go through this. Certainly, changing student demographics and populations and needs, that's not necessarily new right now. It's still a part of us. I'll give you an example. Many years ago, Michigan realized that the number of high school graduates coming forward to college was declining substantially in the state. The University of Michigan was the first to recognize it and realized, for example, that it had to begin to rely on out-of-state students to meet their overall budgetary goals. And they established a system, which in fact I helped them work with, to create incentives for the deans and the faculties of the colleges to recruit students and realize the revenue benefits therefrom, and frankly turned themselves into a very different institution during that effort. That was not their pandemic, but it was really a serious problem. Paying attention to the demographics of your region are very critical. Price sensitivity has been with us for a few years now, especially so since the states have been decreasing their allocations to state universities almost across the board in this country. And as that happens, it turns out that the dependency on tuition and tuition pricing becomes critical, but price sensitivity is on the rise. And it is being addressed in complex ways through student financial aid. There are good, bad, and ugly ways of addressing financial aid that at some point we might want to talk about. I'm going to emphasize the decreasing half-life of skills and increased demand for them. We are coming across multiple universities and industries that hire from them that are telling us that the industries need certain kinds of skills upon graduation and would like to see the universities participate with them in providing updates to those skills as time passes. Indeed, to show you how intense this is, the International Chamber of Commerce has put together a consulting team to work with universities and businesses across the world to emphasize better preparatory work at the colleges for jobs in the industries and more significant roles of the industries, providing future internships and future opportunities to retrain at the colleges. The online learning we probably know a lot about, and the pandemic may have taught us more than we ever wanted to know in the beginning about it. But what we're realizing is that it's much stronger than we ever imagined it was, that it can be a shareable event where new kinds of studios arise that enable interactive online learning with a professor many miles away, perhaps many countries away, with TAs on the home campus helping the students through the work, and thus getting the highest level of content from the leading educators in a field, but worked at from a distance. So the changing funding models we're seeing, in particular the states, I would emphasize the corporations increasingly driving driving research. That's a function of the fact that the high-tech industries are leading in their own internal research works. But there are significant examples of universities that have teamed with other universities and with certain technology companies. I'm speaking of technology primarily because of my role at MIT for several years, where in fact we put together a project to lure corporations to our campus. In particular, we lured Novartis from Switzerland to put their R&D center in the middle of MIT's campus. Then we put together a project plan with Harvard and ultimately a partnership to work with the pharmaceutical companies in the development of their work, which eventually transformed into a new version of the Genome Project. And one of the end games of that Genome Project out of MIT, Harvard, turns out to be the Moderna vaccine. So just a thought in that regard. Let's move ahead.
Really quickly, just showing the results from today's audience.
Yes.
Okay, and back to you.
All right, thank you. I'm going to go through this quickly. You can read it. I don't need to speak much to it. But what we have seen is material declines in enrollment across most all demographics. Overall, 2.5%, public institutions 4%, freshmen down 13%, community colleges 10%. A significant change is international students down in great measure, and where universities have depended on them, they have depended on them because they typically pay full tuition. And therefore, one international student is a larger revenue loss by significant measure than one national student who might be receiving financial aid. First-time international students is down. That's probably a COVID reason, but there are also critical issues on intellectual property ownership and intellectual property theft across nations in the country. And that is affecting especially international student enrollments at some of the high-tech universities in the country. State funding, we all know, has been in decline in many areas, but it's been a cause for a lot of our work with many institutions as they attempt to supplant state funding with other sources of revenues. The reopening costs, you all know about as many as anybody else, but as we're looking at what expenses institutions have incurred, and we read the data every day from multiple sources, from the Chronicle to Inside Higher Education to reports from DeCubo, we're seeing as much as 24 billion estimated expenses industry-wide just to get back open again. You'll see in a case study that part of that is figuring out how to use space. Space is a chronically what shall I say, underutilized asset of universities. And people are realizing how to better use their space, but it's taken a lot of work. I would note auxiliary enterprises. Universities did not realize how much they depended on auxiliaries until they didn't have revenues in housing, dining, and related areas. In particular, for large universities with big athletics programs, the athletics revenues decline has been devastating. You can see just the NC2A distribution of funds from Division I schools is down 60%. That's a meaningful amount. With that, we will, I think we can move ahead. Perhaps enough on this. You can continue reading. I want to make sure we get to Jennifer as quickly as we can.
Thanks, John. So I'm going to go through some of the case studies, the relevant case studies, and really starting with this mid-sized public research university. So space utilization, good space data, as John was mentioning, understanding of space is typically a challenge at many institutions. And these types of challenges were only exacerbated when COVID hit, and return to campus plans, as you all know, really had to be developed quite quickly. And so in this particular case study, they needed a data-informed plan to reopen research, auxiliary, other facilities, while ensuring, of course, adherence to all public safety guidance. And room scheduling, again, as many of you may have experienced, had to occur while on-campus enrollment was in flux. And considerations had to include the turnover times for classrooms, for cleaning, and really when you aren't sure how many students you've been planning on having for campus. So the challenge was that their existing system, their space system, did not account for pandemic space needs. What system would, right, at that point? And it couldn't be modeled in that space system, and space systems didn't exist to do this. So that's the first thing. The second is that now more than ever, boards, executive leadership, they want data-driven evidence to support decision-making on campus, not guesswork. And also now more than ever, institutions need agility. Last year, as we know, institutions didn't know what it would be like in August. And while I think we're all certainly hopeful that things will be different or much better this year, having a model that allows you to quickly respond gives you confidence in your options. So the work here that we led was developing a classroom supply and demand planning model to project fall 2020 course level enrollments and really ultimately plan the on-campus instruction space capacity. And key also were the custodial needs. So as you can see, the target was 50 square feet of instructional space per person, and included mapping the classroom utilization rates throughout the week to see where opportunities existed in times and availability, and really where that existing space could be leveraged. And for this particular project, the institution said that the model that we built really nailed it, and recently came back and asked if we could update the model with new data to analyze this fall space and provide various scenarios, including what would it look like with reduced square footage versus the 50 square feet that was used last fall. So the key is that the model provides repeatable analysis when new data is applied. So this is a specific case study related to campus reopening and space planning, really specific to COVID, and the modeling that allows you to take quick action to pivot. But now, as we're hopefully seeing the light of day, we're starting to get the questions from universities of what should campus space look like after COVID? And I think John touched some of these things earlier. With students more comfortable with online classes, with universities potentially more willing to allow some portion of remote work for positions where it makes sense, and individuals maybe don't need an office or a cubicle space 40 hours a week. What does shared space or hoteling look like? What are those options? Institutions are asking themselves, what should space governance look like going forward? Who should be involved in those decisions?
Jennifer, I'd like to make a quick comment on this. The most valuable thing I think you said was that this wasn't a one-time effort. It became a planning model that can be continuously updated with new data and used in real time to inform decision making.
Yes, absolutely. So really, and back to what John just said, do we have that space data visibility? Does the institution have that to make those informed decisions? And so it really allows a university to pivot strategically on space. And certainly, because John again just said, not just for now, but in the future. So really reimagining the university footprint. What does that look like with a transfigured pedagogical approach and design, and mass lectures, if necessary, in an online-only platform? It can allow you to integrate your operating capital planning budget when you have good, strong space understanding. But most of all, it really provides you those nimble solutions that you need when you have good space modeling to really ensure that you have the flexibility. You can ensure, in the times that we're in, certainly the faculty and staff safety under COVID, but other things, down to optimizing research space, optimizing your F&A rates, aligning space to enhance best in faculty hiring practices. thinking now, what does future space look like? Do we need that future construction project that we were thinking of, or what does deferred maintenance look like, and how can that be managed? So really, in summary, a strategic approach to space management and space modeling allows the institution to really conduct budgeting and capital planning strategically, use space to incentivize, impact culture, and ultimately, and most of all during these times, really remain agile and pivot quickly when crises occur with data, and to have an informed approach towards that data. So we can, in the interest of time, I'm going to try to move through these case studies rather quickly so we can get to some questions, hopefully, as we go along and at the end. So the next case study is really not only an example of what a strategic enrollment management plan can provide an institution, but really an example of how such a plan can help an institution have the data they need to quickly pivot if needed. So John outlined before, many institutions were facing enrollment declines pre-COVID, which were then only heightened when the pandemic occurred. And enhanced data insights and a new collaborative governance structure allowed Kansas State to not only lay the foundation for a strategic enrollment management plan to reverse their enrollment declines and stabilize tuition revenues pre-COVID, but during COVID, it also provided them the data-informed strategic enrollment management framework that allowed them to rapidly pivot. So really key to this work, again, I'm saying this word a lot today, is data, was improved data usage and a really clear understanding of tuition price elasticity. And what this did is this laid the foundation for eliminating institutional silos. It allowed them to reorganize the enrollment management function and really form a collaborative governance approach. And you can see, it might be a bit small there, but the governance structure depicted in the center. A strategic enrollment management governance committee was formed under the oversight of the president's cabinet, and 5 task force groups were formed, all with the understanding that data, financial stability, and marketing and communications were the foundation and really critical enablers of the work that the committee and task force was leading. What this led to was the analysis of the tuition rates and finding, just as one finding, that non-resident tuition rates were not competitive and in-state aid really was not broadly distributed. And in the end, what the institution had was a source of truth for data and a clear path of governance to continue to move forward in a positive direction, making data-driven decisions. What I'll also say is, as a follow-up, and in COVID now, the vice provost for enrollment management said that while they had experienced some drops related to COVID, as many institutions did, their strategic enrollment management efforts are showing progress in the university's recruitment efforts. And actually, right pre-pandemic, they had a 7.5% increase in applications, which was a huge leap from where they had been in those previous years, and the 11% decline of enrollment that they had had. They experienced about a 4% drop in enrollment, but that was lower than they had expected. And they're confident, though, that this year coming will really bring strong opportunities for growth. They have some new strategies with the Missouri Tuition Match Program. They also have new scholarship plans in place that'll make a pretty significant difference. And as could be expected, of note, though, they did have some fairly significant online growth last fall. It jumped about 10.8%. So all said, it really was the groundwork that they had laid pre-COVID prepared them for the pivot that needed to be made, and given what they have the opportunity for this fall, has the opportunity to put them nicely back on track. So we can go to the next case study. This particular opportunity at a private New England university, we know that return to campus scenarios have differed across institutions. That was mentioned earlier in the introductions. But one common challenge that was faced by all institutions, I think, is ensuring that students, faculty, and staff were safe, and really ensuring that the number of positive COVID cases could be lessened as much as possible, and results closely monitored via a strong testing compliance program. And so this university needed support in establishing policies and managing operational processes to safely and equitably reopen campus for the fall semester. And so in order to do so, what they did was they established a rigorous testing program where most students and employees were required to test twice a week. As they had a hybrid approach to learning, the testing initially involved about half of their student population, and they monitored and reported those results daily. There was a daily dashboard, daily reporting that came out that was reviewed by the president and the leadership committee on this. So what they did was, prior to the students' return, they engaged in a pilot with employees. They established strong compliance, daily huddles with leadership. And for employees who actually didn't test, they followed up with supervisors. They had strict conduct policies for students who were out of compliance. They even established a healthy ambassador team who roved around campus looking for students who were congregating in large groups and out of compliance. So I can imagine the fun that those individuals had in breaking up the various student gatherings and groups, and the said reactions that I'm sure they sometimes received. But actually, students were pretty understanding of it. They were very clear on what the compliance regulations were, and you know, for the most part did comply. So also, you know, as time has progressed, they've stayed vigilant. They've pursued other potential options, which I know many institutions have discussed or also considered pursuing, such as wastewater testing. That does tend to work best for institutions when you have smaller dorm size populations. It's a little trickier when you have larger facilities. They've also looked at pooled testing, meaning you can combine 10 individual samples together and run one test. If it's positive, then you test the 10 individuals that were in that sampling. And it saves significant money on initially running 10 tests. And we're still working with them, and they continue to follow, of course, all of the CDC guidelines. So what this particular case study provides is really not only an approach in how to execute in a very specific situation when we're talking about COVID, but it also serves to underline the need for universities to have specific emergency preparedness programs and plans, including considerations for things such as natural disasters, earthquakes, hurricanes, tornadoes, things that, you know, are often coming certainly through the South when we think of those types of emergencies. Universities are finding really the importance of risk management. If they plan for crisis, then they'll be better prepared. So we can move to the next case study. So Marymount University, in 2020, Huron was engaged by Marymount University to identify opportunities to improve fiscal sustainability of its academic programming. Now, I'll pause for a moment and recognize that I would say up till several years ago, discussing the cost of academic programming in a university setting would not be a well-received discussion, right? It was the third rail. It was something that nobody wanted to discuss for the most part. You know, there's a lot of challenges surrounding those types of conversations, but we're finding more and more institutions wanting to make that connection and what the cost to educate is. And so Marymount, one of those universities, wanted to also find some potential cost savings and revenue opportunities in conjunction with this particular academic study. So the university, some background, they had experienced enrollment declines in the past 5 years. There was growing administrative overhead in the academic enterprise. Leadership had minimal visibility of how much a given program or department was actually costing the university. And Marymount knew that it needed to course correct. And as part of its new strategic plan, targeted a more informed, efficient, and a more market-oriented approach that emphasized both teaching and research. So Marymount partnered with Huron to establish a comprehensive cost to educate model, and that integrated all core academic cost drivers. So that included faculty workload, student enrollment, curricula, compensation, overhead. And the goal of this model was really to map these costs all the way down to the credit level so that the university could establish the true cost of instruction across all programs and identify the distinct structural or programmatic elements that were driving rising academic cost. So through the model, Marymount actually developed key interrelated insights into its current academic structure. And among other findings, the analysis showed the faculty were spending significant time and effort on administrative and out of load activities. It was creating substantial supplemental costs beyond the base compensation of those members, those faculty members. And department level financials showed that administrative overhead was an increasing driver also of the costs within Marymount's departments. So these findings and others really helped highlight the university's academic structure as a key area of opportunity. And just for some context, Marymount had 4 schools and 25 departments. That was a really large volume for the university of this size. And this was inadvertently driving many of the adverse cost trends. Its spread created redundant administrative activities in each department. That then forced the units to allocate more faculty time to take on those activities. and it proportionally increased supplemental compensation once again. So support staff and faculty were also required for each unit, so causing administrative overhead to increase regardless of the enrollment declines. And the structure was artificially creating administrative activity that was really manifesting in rising costs across these areas. So once that key cost driver was identified, Huron was able to support Marymount in developing a new academic structure that leveled shared academic resources to really better allocate resources and maintain focus on the core mission of instruction and research, driving back to what was the purpose of Marymount, what was their core mission. And the proposed structure set the stage for decreased administrative overhead, increased interdisciplinary work by identifying opportunities for larger departments, a shared curricula, and ultimately cooperation among faculty. I would also add additionally, as part of the overall administrative review to uncover cost savings and revenue generating opportunities that occurred concurrently with this academic alignment, Huron was able to find between $4 to about $9 million in cost savings and about $2 million to about $6.8 million, $7 million in revenue enhancement opportunities for the university, who has roughly a $100 million budget. So this case is a really good example of how valuable it is to invest efforts in determining the linkages between elements of academic cost. So many institutions know what the specific problems may be, but we may miss the forest for the trees without an all-inclusive model that really highlights those connections between disparate data sets. And Marymount used the cost to educate model to identify the true cost drivers, and that has created for them both short and long-term benefits for the university. With that, I'm going to turn it over to John, who's going to talk a bit about a case in change management, which I would venture to say is work that is certainly was done in all of the case studies that I've highlighted for you, but really specifically talking a bit more about the change management aspect. And John, I will turn it to you.
Thank you. Just a quick note, that big 70% number kind of got your attention. And it's our estimate of the change programs that fail to achieve their goals. In other words, failure is more prominent than success in change management initiatives in universities. And there are several, and we have a few examples at the bottom left of the screen that happen to be public knowledge. But for example, the attempted sale of Rose Museum assets in excuse me, that way too many people believed were important to the campus that they did not predict. They did not understand who would be most impacted by the sale of the museum. And as a consequence, that effort failed. Berkeley attempted to close a college of chemistry. They didn't make the case adequately. They didn't involve the faculty adequately or the students involved in it adequately, and that didn't work. We all know that Sweetbriar, during a period of failing enrollment, decided to close itself down, only to be forced back into opening by its alumni because the impact on them was not considered adequately as they went forward. So the point is this, that engagement of end users is vital to change management. We saw a project that another company did for a major public university in the East to bring in a new Oracle cloud-based financial system.
I invited you again to join.
I'm sorry? Oh, and it was implemented with, and a lot of folks clapped their hands, and the consulting firm, and it wasn't us, went away, only for the administration to discover that they couldn't bill the federal government for this $675 million of resources the government was supporting research with. They began billing the federal government using QuickBooks. And the consequence of that was a dramatic drop in revenues because of the painstaking effort. And the realization was, when some folks I know actually debugged what went wrong, was that in fact, the implementation team and the university did not, I repeat, did not engage the research faculty in the effort to implement a financial system, and did not engage their staff who input the $675 million a year in billings to the federal government. And of course, those faculty in the research world had far more political clout in that university than anybody else, and the project took multiple millions of dollars to get back on track. Failure to engage end users. And so I'm going to say just a couple of quick things that aren't on the slide but are memorable to me. It's an old notion that says, walk a mile in the shoes of any person whose role you would significantly change. In other words, understand the impact broadly on a campus. That ownership of projects should be distributed. End users, insofar as possible, should be involved early in the discussion of what the problem is you're trying to solve, because they will often have a lot to contribute to it, perhaps more than the central administration, even with their top-down commitment. I'm reminded of something that Peter Drucker once said about change management. He said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. The Curry corollary to that is that in higher education, culture eats strategy for lunch and dinner too. And then I'm reminded of Lou Gerstner's perspective when he had to dramatically change the direction that IBM was moving in when he took that company over several years ago. And his statement in a book he wrote called Teaching the Elephant to Dance was that he had to understand the culture so he could engage the culture to change the culture. And so I'll just leave you with those quick maxims, and you can read the rest of the detail on this slide as you see fit.
Thanks, John. So I think we have another poll question. If everyone could just take a moment, which case study reflects your current challenges and priorities to address the operational change, the enrollment strategy at Kansas, campus reopening, as we talked about the testing and the COVID-related challenges, academic portfolio, or change management that, as John just outlined. I'll give everyone a second to respond.
Please continue to respond. I'll leave it up for a few more seconds, and I'll go ahead and move forward to the next slide.
Thank you. Okay. And then the last question that we would love to ask is, what kinds of change management issues are you wrestling with today? And so this would actually be submitted in the chat, not in the poll feature. So if you're able to submit in the chat below at the bottom of the screen, and then we can get an idea of maybe what some of those issues you're wrestling with today. And we can also take a few moments to answer some questions. So we'll give a moment for that. Great. So we can see which case study reflects current challenges. So it looks like enrollment strategy thus far is at the top of the list, which I think we can all likely have expected that, where we were with the COVID-related enrollment challenges of the last year and trying to predict what the future is going to look like. I think, you know, we're hopeful that some return to normalcy can occur, you know, for fall, and things are looking somewhat positive in that direction. But obviously those enrollment challenges continue as the application flows, you know, have come in and what will become, you know, next year's class. So not surprised there. Change management, again, I don't think that's a surprise based on how integral that is really now and in pivoting quickly, and how you do that element of change management in what can often too be a compressed structure or timeline than when you might normally have to make these changes as well. And then I think third, we have academic portfolio. And again, as I said a bit earlier, definitely seeing more of that than we might have seen in the past as well. Okay. All right. So with that, John, would you like to take some questions? We can probably, or some comments that we've received at this point.
Sure. In fact, I just saw one of them go by, and I'll just comment on it. One of the questions was how to redistribute work while downsizing. And I thought of a couple of things. In one university I worked with for over a year, a few years ago, they wanted to downsize not as an overall downsizing, but they wanted to reduce a lot of administrative costs, which they could see a way to do. So we had proposed for them multiple ways of reducing administrative costs, but the concern was the impact on the staff who would lose their jobs. And what we observed was that the university and its staff overall had about a 7% turnover rate every year. So there were always vacancies arising. And what we said to the folks who were scheduled to lose their jobs is that as openings arose, we would make them the primary applicants for those jobs and would in fact retrain where necessary. So that as job openings that would persist occurred, we moved the people in the positions which would no longer exist into those job openings. It took about 1.5 years to get the reductions. So it wasn't instant, but it went over very well with the institution itself. So that's one. The other one came about on reducing current recurring costs. The biggest recurring costs I know, other than faculty compensation, especially tenured faculty compensation, are in business processes that have not been re-examined. And if you look at an overhaul of your business processes from top to bottom, there can be enormous savings. They recur. I'll give one instance of a university I knew where it took 8 signatures to get a person on payroll. We examined that and understood something quite fundamental. The first person who signed the payroll authorization said, at least 6 people know more about this than I do. When it got up to the chancellor to sign, she said, there are at least 6 people who know more about this than I do. And she signed. Nobody took ownership for a payroll authorization. We reduced the payroll authorization to 2. And that reduced costs dramatically, not least of which was it reduced the time for the original application to be on payroll from 2 months to 3 days. So I will talk about business process redesign as really crucial. Sometimes it does involve software. And if any of you are involved in new enterprise systems in the early stages, now's the time to do that process redesign because there's huge savings in places you didn't expect them.
One comment was working on our academic portfolio requires change management skills, and I don't see this as either or. And John, I'm sure you would agree with that strongly when we're talking about academic portfolio work or academic portfolio changes.
Oh, I certainly would. First of all, just the examination of the academic portfolio creates tensions. In other words, you do need to involve academic departments, you need to involve staff in those departments, and you're going to be generating data that they can't anticipate. And therefore, the minute you invade their worlds, and you very often need to do that because of the granularity of data needed in a good portfolio analysis, is the day you ought to be prepared with your best change management skills. And so it's not either or. In fact, it's the only time you get both is if you have the change management skills. If you don't get either.
Reducing recurring costs with lack of funding from state or tuition increases is a change management opportunity being someone indicated being wrestled with today. What are your thoughts, John, on that, and how institutions can be mindful of reducing those recurring costs, which are a challenge while funding is being cut?
I did note in the administrative sector that very often business process redesign can save a lot of costs. It saves time, numbers of people involved, saves costs. Another issue that is very dollar consuming in the administration world is the time it takes to gather data. I once observed to an institution that getting an answer to a question of data in their campus was almost like an instant institutional research problem. So a lack of good data infrastructure and ease of access requires a lot of cost, and it can be transformed in business processes that would yield a common data architecture and a common query tool. At the same time, though, the academic portfolio can reduce recurring costs, where if you find in a given discipline, you have more faculty than you need to produce a quality product. Those faculty are recurring costs, and over time, unless they're tenured, you could begin to reduce them by not hiring, by reducing adjuncts, by perhaps making a hard decision over a tenure decision and the like. There are more, of course, but I will suggest this much. In all of our work that we've done in consulting, one of the biggest consumers of universities' time is answering fairly straightforward questions with respect to data access. That suggests ultimately one of the strongest initiatives you could make, but which may involve some upfront costs, is to get total control over your data architecture, let's say in the cloud. If you happen to be implementing some Workday or Oracle products today, they come with their cloud data warehouses, and then easing the ability of anyone to access those data that has permission through simple query tools, not writing a large program.
John, I would add too, when you were talking about the process, understanding the processes to be able to enhance them, via technology. One thing I would say, I'm working on a project at a state system institutions, about 5 institutions, and it's a financial administrative restructure. And one of the first things was there were no, quite frankly, weren't processes documented. So it was even understanding what are the current state processes, so that when there is a restructure, how can you simplify the processes? Your example earlier, 8 signatures on a form, unnecessary, right? So how can you simplify and gain efficiency? And when you are restructuring, it looks very different for each institution. Many say, well, shared services, we can never do shared services. In this particular work that we're doing, we are providing a specific financial organization for FP&A work in it for each of the institutions that allows them the strategic budgeting and finance support that they need and want at the institutional level. And then many of the we'll call it back office transactional things of a financial nature are able to be leveraged and done in a more consolidated manner, in a more shared service manner. And so by mapping those processes and understanding how they're happening, you can gain efficiencies in where those connections are and where those pieces fall. So I don't think I could agree more. John, we have a question that came in a bit earlier, and I know we don't have a great deal of time, but I'd love for you to take a quick answer at this. It said that you mentioned during your presentation on recent market trends in higher ed that some colleges and universities are partnering with corporations and the like. Have specific colleges within universities considered moving toward the medical training model where the actual services are being trained on and delivered to the public? I'm wondering about this model for colleges of education.
I can't give you a specific in this country, but although I think there's a lot of it going on. I mean, there are specific engagements I already know with hospitals, and I can say this specifically, even some of our work in Oklahoma, and working with the colleges regionally to mainstream their students into nursing programs and into jobs, sort of end to end. From the other standpoint, we designed a new university for a new city in Saudi Arabia as a company. And one of the things we learned from people who were hiring was that students who graduated from the universities in the region needed at least 2 more years of in-house training in the places that were hiring them. So we designed a system in which the places that hire help develop the curriculum on the campus, and the access via that curriculum into the places that hire was started as a conversation with prospective students and their families in the junior year in high school. And the institutions often provided, the hiring institutions often provided scholarships, guaranteed internships along the way, and therefore were part of the educational process from the gleam in the eye in the junior year to the first job, and very often the next and the next jobs. So that would be my quick answer, and I'm thinking it's time to go, so I better shut up.
If I could just add to that very quickly, John, I do know that there are states who are having conversations specific to the education sector about following a more, I think, as you said it, a medical protocol type training, where there is some initial certification, but allowing those teachers to come in and operate under a mentor, much like a resident might. If you would like some more information about that, if you can feel free to send me an email and I can connect you with our expert on that. But there is some conversation at the state level about that I would support you guys talking to your states about pushing that type of thing forward.
I can tell you right now, we're doing a lot of work with the medical school with a very current modern curriculum, which engages students in their first year of medical school in the laboratories, in the patient care world. And they generate their courses not as chemistry or biochemistry, but they combine maybe 3 major courses and then teach the courses around the disease and the treatment. And the students are engaged in the treatment with practitioners in the hospital as they're studying the basic sciences. So this is emerging rapidly as the top curriculum right now in medical centers.
And while as a chemist, it hurts my heart that they're not doing pure chemistry. Actually, that's probably the better way to go about it.
You grew up in the old school.
Exactly. John, there's one question here from Ira about something admission offices can do to support students in post-pandemic. I know we're at our time and we're starting to lose people, but do you want to just quickly say something about that?
You know what I've seen, I'll say something a little more generically than that. We saw that students, one of the big problems with students even on a campus prior to admissions was that they couldn't get their problem solved. They had a financial aid problem. They'd go to the financial aid office. The financial aid office would refer it to somebody else, and a week later the problem would be solved, except they couldn't do that anymore. The campuses built online service centers, which through the electronic connectivity among the relevant players to answer the question, got students much faster feedback. I would submit that admissions officers could develop these online capabilities with their applicants, with their admitted students, to enable the questions to come and to be filtered through the campus as necessary, perhaps to an academic department, which would say they have vacancies or something to that effect. But I think one of the most effective things we've done electronically is service centers in the student world for students, and that I would not be surprised to see those continue. The student would much rather get a fast answer to a question online than a 3-day answer by walking around.
Very good.
And the admissions office could connect you with financial aid, like what's the status of your financial aid position with respect to admissions. And so I would imagine that those kind of developments have begun to happen, and I think they should grow and become part of the business.
Well said, John. Well, as we are starting to close this out, our upcoming sessions, the next one's in a couple of weeks, on how to align faculty effort to institutional mission. As I said earlier, we hope that you will not just come back yourself, but you'll bring people with you. But we also want to invite you to send feedback. Send it to us directly. We are not opposed to changing course where need be and taking additional feedback, because this is something we want to be helpful for you. So I just really want to, again, thank our partners at Huron and great presentation. Thank you so much. They are partners in this whole endeavor, but we're also going to be highlighting institution level folks in these different areas. So we look forward to seeing you. Chancellor, is there anything you'd like to say as we part ways this afternoon?
Well, I'd just like to, Dr. Pruitt, appreciate the good turnout from our member institutions and our member states in SREB. I do think this is a very timely issue, as has been my experience with Huron. They always get right to the critical issue, and I think their presentation today has been analytical. It's been very useful from a practical standpoint, and we appreciate their work. Again, we appreciate SREB determining that this would be a resource that would be important for institutions within our 16-state region to have at our disposal. So I think it was a great job today by Huron, and we appreciate the participation.
So thank you, everyone. We look forward to seeing you on March 31st. John, anything else do you have? Or
just my gratitude to all of you. Chancellor Johnson, thank you for your joining Stephen today.
You bet.
That was an enormous help and gives us some real grounding in the academic world. I want to thank our Huron team. Two of them are on the background right now that many of you know them. And it's Chris Burns and Glen McLaurin. And then, of course, to Jennifer. My gratitude to all of you and for all the hard work that underlay this. And we look forward to talking to you again in a couple of weeks.
Great.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you all, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. And just note that we will send out the slide deck and a recording of today's session. Have a great one.